the semi-quiet room, and then you have to get people to shut up. That's always a good sign. So welcome to the Wilson Center. My name is Roger Mark D'Souza, and I direct our programs on global sustainability and resilience here at the Wilson Center. And directing a program on sustainability and resilience is always exciting and challenging. There are many reactions towards this term resilience, and I think there are also many opportunities. And one of the opportunities that I very often think of are questions around financing, alternative financial mechanisms to build resilience. Most recently, I was reading something on resilient bonds. So there are a lot of emerging approaches. So I'm really excited that we have an opportunity to collaborate with CARE, who's one of our very good partners, to think about microfinancing for resilience. What does this mean in terms of saving for Rainless Day? Many of you are familiar with the Wilson Center. We serve as the living memorial to President Wilson, established by Congress. And one of the things that we think is really important with regards to our work is our nonpartisan focus. We really try to focus on the space to bring different perspectives together for mutual understanding and engagement. And in that regard, I was quite pleased that last week we were able to host Vice President Pence here at the center. And while he was here, he was speaking specifically about issues coming out of the Miami Summit on Central America. But one of the things that he said about the Wilson Center is that he really respected that we were an institution of independent research, open dialogue, and actionable ideas. This is our mission. You know, we really focus on the evidence. How do we move that evidence and engage others, and how do we use that to move to concrete, specific action? He said to us that the Wilson Center has a unique perspective on America's essential role in global affairs, and that has been true since the founding of the center in 1968, that the Wilson Center helps the world to look at America as a standard bearer for freedom, and that American strength is critical to peace, prosperity across the wider world. So part of what we try to do in our work is engage a Washington, D.C. audience and beyond. We're very concerned about talking outside the Beltway. This conversation is being webcast live. We have a number of partners who tune in online, and we will produce a summary of our discussion afterwards, which we know many of our colleagues use internationally. So this is very much an opportunity for us at times to explain Washington, D.C. to the world, but also to explain the world to Washington, D.C. and beyond. So we take that quite seriously, which is why I'm so pleased that we have three colleagues today to help us think about this question of saving for a Rainless Day. So Salome Mango is a program manager for Pathways, and you have everyone's bio sketch. Pathways is a U.S. $4 million program targeting 16,000 women that aims at increasing agricultural productivity, incomes, and empowerment of women in equitable agricultural systems. Sophie Romano is with Oxfam, having joined Oxfam America's Community Finance Department in 2011, where she runs two flagship programs, Saving for Change and R4, the Rural Resilience Initiative. And then Cassie Chandler is a senior global manager at the Grameen Foundation, and she has more than 12 years of experience in international health and community development. So they will bring complementary perspectives to looking at these issues. But as we start with Salome, I've asked each of them, as we kick off the conversation, to tell us one thing about themselves that's not revealed in the bio sketch. So Salome, how about we start with you? Tell us something about yourself, about you, that we would not know just reading your bio sketch.
Thank you so much. I love women, not because I'm a woman, but I love women, and I have a passion to change women's lives.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask you, why don't you tell us a little bit about your work? You can go into your presentation, and I'm sure we'll see that passion in evidence.
Yeah. So.
And you could be there or here, wherever you're more comfortable.
I think I want to.
Okay.
Over there. Okay, so I think you've already known me, so I'll not.
Just because we're webcast.
Okay, so I'm Salome Mhango. I'm a manager for the Pathways program, working for CARE, but based in Malawi. My presentation is basically going to talk a little bit about the program that I'm representing, specifically focusing on the theory of change that we are using, and the Farmer Field and Business School approach, which is an extension approach that we are using to deliver our program. I will also talk about VSLAs because Pathways program is layering on village savings and loan associations, and also talk about how the village savings and loans are related to bring about resilience and some of the modifications that we can make to the village savings and loan association so that they make the people that we save become more resilient. In terms of the theory of change, Pathways is guided by a unifying theory of change, which believes that for us to really make meaningful changes in the lives of the people that we serve, farmers and women, we need to deal with the underlying causes of poverty and the women exclusion. So the theory of change that the Pathways is guided with is basically based on 5 change levers. These are increased capacity, increased access to inputs and resources, increased productivity, household influence, and having an enabling environment. We believe that if you focus on these 5 change levers, you'll be able to make the farmers, and especially the women farmers, to become more productive in their agriculture and make more profits. There will also be equity and empowerment. And by doing that, we'll be able to achieve the goal of the program, which is to have more secure and resilient livelihoods for the people that we are working with. We'll also talk a little bit more about the Farmer Field and Business School approach, which we are using to implement our program, the Pathways program, not just in Malawi, because Pathways is a global program. It's in 4 countries. So the Farmer Field and Business School approach is a standard approach that is layering on the farmer field schools, which I think most of us are aware about. However, this one is unique because it talks about integration and it also talks about women exclusion. We believe that for us to make meaningful changes, we cannot just focus on one aspect. We need to look at the farmers in their entirety, not just focusing on one element. So with the Farmer Field and Business Schools approach, we are able to implement agriculture interventions, markets, gender, and nutrition. And the Pathways Farmer Field and Business School is guided by a calendar, what we call an FFBS calendar. So the FFBS calendar is developed to follow the agriculture season. Basically, there are 3 or 4 seasons in the agriculture calendar. We'll have a pre-season, in-season, during season, and after season. So we look at the 4 components that the program is focusing on and develop our calendar in line with that so that the farmers are able to receive holistic training for them to have meaningful improvements made in their lives. I'll focus more on the village savings and loans because, as I said, the Pathways program is layering on the village savings and loans, and we think they have a direct relevance to resilience. So village savings and loans are basically there to provide simple savings and loan facilities to communities. So in the picture, you can see women sitting around in a circle doing a village savings and loan session. In the other picture, you are seeing a training for village agents. So in the Pathways program, we do implement our programs by using what we call community-based trainers. These are locally identified people who receive training in not just village savings and loans, but all the components that the program is focusing on. And they go and train the community. So in that training, they were being equipped with skills on how they can be opening, the village savings and loan associations could be opening accounts with the mobile banks and mobile networks and banks that are there in Malawi. So a little bit about village savings and loan associations in Malawi. CARE introduced village savings and loans in Malawi in 1999. Before that, we didn't have village savings and loan associations at all. And as of 2014, 67 organizations were involved in village savings and loan association activities in one form or the other. The number continues to increase because 2014 is a long time ago, so we might be maybe hitting 100 and slightly over. And government of Malawi has now included Village Savings and Loan Association as the 5th pillar of the National Safety Net program. So this is an achievement, and it's recognition by government on the role that village savings and loans are playing to make people become more resilient and also to improve their livelihoods. In the pathways alone, over 98% of its beneficiaries are participating in village savings and loan activities. And in 2016, they shared about $871,000 US. This is representing a 62% increase from 2015. Part of that success is because village savings and loan associations are not implemented in isolation. They are layering on. They also benefit from the other market-oriented activities that the program is focusing on. So the money that is generated through value chain work is also reinvested into the groups. And sometimes these people do income-generating activities. So that also contributes to increased income. And so the Pathways program in Malawi has signed a memorandum of agreement with Airtel Limited, which is a mobile company, and Opportunity Bank of Malawi to create products for village savings and loan associations. Now, to resilience, my understanding of resilience is that it's about building capacities by which communities can manage shocks and adapt to change now and in the future. And those capacities are interrelated. We are talking about anticipatory, absorptive, adaptive, and transformative capacities. So CARE, through the different programs that it implements, is building capacities for the beneficiaries to be able to have asset base for adaptation, and also to provide knowledge and information, to innovate for adaptation and decision making in its resilience programming. So how is VSL model related to resilience? So the components of village savings and loan associations are basically a social fund. You have a social fund within the village savings and loan associations. You have the savings component where men and women in groupings of 15 to 25 people come together and save maybe every 2 weeks. You have a loan component, and there's also group membership. Those are the 4 major components of the village savings and loans. So the social fund contributes to absorptive capacities by providing resources after a shock to avoid negative coping mechanisms. In a country where I come from, like Malawi, droughts, erratic rainfall, flooding are very common, and people sell their assets because they don't have other options available. But with the social fund, if they have an illness or a death or whatever kind of calamity happening to them, they can always go to their social fund to borrow interest-free from their group. Savings also is a way to manage and financially plan for predictable costs and likely ad hoc costs based on risk landscape. So savings do provide the opportunity for the people that we work with to meet the day-to-day expenditures, both foreseen and unforeseen, and that makes them to become more resilient. Loans offer potential to invest in actions and activities that make them adapt to emerging conditions and generate benefits that help them to pay back the loans. Most of the people that we work with in VSLAs do take loans to invest in small businesses. So that helps them to generate money, which they can pay back to their groups if they have loans, and the extra they use to meet needs in their lives and in their homes. And then the group membership provides the ability to transform our systems by challenging negative gender norms and building women economically. So just the fact that women are organized in a grouping, that alone is an opportunity for them to talk about negative cultural behaviors, norms, and attitudes, and also to use the collective voice to challenge some of the practices that normally would put women in an awkward situation. So for us, we feel that VSLA as a model is very related to resilience. So how have VSLAs increased resilience? VSLAs are a potential tool for resilience programming. As I said, the VSLAs provide access to savings. So this is a buffer from which the VSLAs members are able to draw on when they have predictable or unpredictable situations in their lives. And also, VSLAs provide an opportunity for consumption smoothing, thereby reducing chances of using negative coping strategies, and also having an opportunity to make lump sum payments. I think you are aware that most VSLAs are patronized by very, very poor people, very vulnerable people. So the fact that they can get a lump sum to buy a bag of fertilizer or to meet a school fees course or health course is something for them. So that makes them to become more resilient also. And then the VSLAs do reach the vulnerable. As you know, the VSLAs target people who are not very, considered to be, maybe let me use the word unbankables. The formal financial sector does not recognize the very vulnerable people, but the VSLA provides an opportunity for them to also participate in the financial landscape. This is so because the share value is decided by the members themselves, so they can put it at the lowest cost so that everyone should be able to afford it. And there's also a lot of flexibility that comes in because it's a self-managed entity. The social fund, it also helps to increase resilience because of the pooled resources for difficult times. And in terms of sustainability, the VSLAs are self-sustaining, therefore they can exist beyond the project period and help people to manage risks within their landscape for increased resilience. VSLAs are really good for increasing resilience, but does that mean that there isn't any modification that we can do to them? I think there is a lot that we can do. The first one is maybe to encourage the VSLA groups to set goals around resilience. Most of the times, coming from a field experience, people will save just for the sake of saving without really having no clear goals in their mind. But if we as facilitators, we could be providing guidance so that they are able to save around the goals that are related to resilience, I think that would be better. And the other modification would be to include risk management investments in VSLA loans. So mostly the VSLAs will take loans for productive investments, not for managing risks. But that's one element that we could also include in the VSLAs. The other modification would be to extend the social fund usage. So mostly now, the VSLAs use the social fund just to pay for maybe health costs or illnesses, but it could become a local level risk insurance with the proper guidance from the facilitators of the VSLA approach. And we also need to minimize risks to cash by developing risk management plan. So on that note, I would share an instance in Malawi where the practice was putting money in this box. It could be a wooden box or a metal box, and people have like keys and a lock, so each one comes and opens. A lot of things would happen. Some people would just run away with the box. There was a lot of risks around, handling cash that way. But now we are going towards encouraging our VSLA groups to link with banks so that they can open accounts and operate at that formal level. And we are getting good support from the banks to go that way. So that's another modification that needs to be done. The other modification is around ensuring that the vulnerable are reached. From experience, I've seen that even though VSLAs seem to be targeting the vulnerable, but the very, very vulnerable are mostly left out because the communities feel that maybe they would be defaulters or they would be creating problems because, they are not financially stable. So we need to build in mechanisms that would make the VSLAs to become more attractive to the very, very vulnerable groups. I already talked about ensuring that financial risks are kept at manageable levels. But what I would maybe spend a little bit more time is adopting an integrated systems approach into resilience building. Rather than focusing on one component, we could look at it as we could use a systems approach also in this regard, so that instead of just focusing on one element, we could look at the beneficiaries in totality. Yeah, so for the Pathways program, where I come from, our women farmers are not only trained to do VSLAs, they are trained on how they could produce more crops, more food. As you can see in that picture, that woman is being trained on how to match a garden field so that there isn't a lot of moisture loss. And in the other picture, it's about women voice. The VSLA group was participating in one of the events in Malawi and talking about issues concerning them. So that's why I'm emphasizing that we need an integrated systems approach for financial inclusion. Oh, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Salome. I think that was a very convincing presentation. I really liked that you talked. I kept having questions, and as I wrote a question down, you would answer it. It's like we didn't plan that, but I was really intrigued to learn how you had adjusted the program with a resilience lens. I really liked hearing specifically that you're saying, okay, if we want to take this idea of resilience, which as a critique, we often hear that resilience is such a sexy word, it's an appealing word. How do we make it practical? And I really got a very set of concrete, specific examples. So thank you. That was amazing. I don't know if you know, but the former president of Malawi, Joyce Banda, is here. She is based at the Wilson Center. She's working with us as a distinguished Senior Distinguished Fellow. And as I talked to President Bonda about the challenges, and there are many challenges that she faced as president of Malawi, one of the things that she often says to me is, you know, Roger Mark, just having to deal with traditional beliefs with regards to women's roles at a very local level. And I was quite taken that you mentioned this idea of group membership and how the fact that you had these groups of women coming together, you were able to deal with these perceptions, negative perceptions of cash flow practices. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about whether this question about traditional beliefs about the role of women, how that comes up in your work, and whether having this group membership of these women's groups is one way that is proving as an effective mechanism to deal with that and build resilience. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think?
Wow. Yeah, so as I said, the fact that women are organized in groups creates that solidarity, and it gives them the voice to be able to challenge, you know, the traditional beliefs and norms and attitudes that normally will work against women, and make them not to be full partakers of, you know, the services and resources that are available. I think it's really difficult for women to stand up on their own as individuals and challenge, you know, men. I come from a culture where men are treated as, you know, head of everything, head of the home, head of land, head over everything. So for you as a woman to stand up and say that, you know, this is my right, I want this piece of land, it's not easy. But using the group approach and the empowerment that comes with the village savings and loans, because now they have at least some money, you know, they can afford some things, the status goes up, it becomes very easy for them to challenge some of, you know, these deep-rooted, you know, beliefs and behaviors that have not helped women at all. So yeah, I think that's the way to go.
Great, okay, thank you very much. So, Cassie, if that's okay, we could go with you and ask you to start with something we don't know from your bio sketch.
Sounds good. Great, thanks everyone for being here. Again, my name is Cassie Chandler and I work for the Grameen Foundation. So something new, you might notice in my bio that I went to graduate school in New Orleans, but maybe what it doesn't say there is I happened to move there for graduate school 3 days before Hurricane Katrina. So that made for an interesting start, and that's a whole other story, but
Perhaps you think about building resilience.
Exactly. It was kind of a petri dish for the learning a lot more about public health and resilience and rebuilding. So absolutely. So it's perfect that Salome went before me, and that I think she did a great job of defining resilience as well as sharing a pretty convincing argument, I think, as to why the Savings Group platform really is a fitting tool or strategy for resilience programs. So I'll kind of, with that in mind, build on top of that. So we have worked with savings groups, with Saving for Change, which I think you'll hear about from Sophie a little bit later. So, similar to VSLA in that groups of women saving, but a slightly different methodology. And we've been working in West Africa, Mali, Benin, and Burkina Faso with savings groups, as it's really been a great platform to do a number of things. And I'm going to talk to you about our health work. So using that platform, we had done health, integrating health and microfinance in the past. And we thought, well, savings groups do a great job of, they're sustained at the community level, they reach the vulnerable, why can't we try integrating health into these? And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that experience. And that kind of started in that we were learning that the savings and the loans that the groups were saving and creating are a great strategy for covering, this cost and that, but we would often find, well, a health shock, maybe that's great, they had that savings, but then they didn't have money for those school fees or food or something else. And so we thought, well, first of all, how can we try to prevent some of those health shocks? And second, things will happen. And so how can we work with that so that it's not necessarily touching their regular savings, so they can keep that for use for other things that they've probably already planned on. And so we started work in Benin, and we really found that health-wise, one of the biggest challenges was timely access to health services. So people were waiting until, maybe their child got sick and they think, well, let me wait a couple days, hopefully they'll get better. Oftentimes they don't, and then suddenly a few days later, the child is seriously ill, which is going to cost a lot more. It's going to be a lot more stressful and, of course, dangerous for the child. So it's preventing that shock a little bit beforehand. And so this, in the long run, if you're able to do these things, then the family will be more resilient, the community will be able to be more resilient, and that they can focus on some of the other, there are shocks and challenges all over, and as much as they can be mitigated, then all the better. And so in terms of health, we designed the program in going into the communities. We found that people lacked appropriate information. There were trust issues in terms of accessing health services. And then oftentimes people didn't have the cash, So again, you're waiting to maybe see if your child gets better because you don't have money and it'd be better not to spend it. And so we really thought about, okay, well, what can we, given those are barriers, what can we do around that? And so the first thing was health education or behavior change communication. And that served as sort of the foundation for the rest of the program. And so we were able to talk about prevention and the importance of accessing health services early, and we integrated the other program components into the education. So I'll talk about the linkages with health providers and the health savings and loans shortly, but all of this was integrated into this messaging. And we used and designed pictorial learning conversations, and that the idea also, so that this could spread further in the community, is that we would use community agents. So these savings groups, they can be formed by our local partner NGOs, for example, but then separately, we can train women who are part of the groups, but could work on creating additional groups, delivering education, and so on. And a lot of these women were not literate, but that doesn't mean they couldn't do a good job at communicating, ideas and organizing groups. So through kind of a cascade training of trainers, we were able to train these women to deliver health education using pictorial learning conversations. And so then on top of that, in this education, we talked about the idea of planning ahead. So if how can you prevent a health shock, or how can you get to a health center faster? And one of the barriers is health savings, and we talked about we can all be encouraged to have our separate rainy day savings, but sometimes that's hard to do, especially when money is tight. And so we talked about, well, we could try out a health savings with your group, but it's not mandatory. And I think the beauty with a lot of these groups is they decide as a group if they want to do something or not and how they're going to do it. So we gave them the information, and they could decide, do they want to do a separate health savings in addition to their regular savings, or do they want to keep with the regular savings? And actually 95% of the groups, after receiving the education, said, no, let's try this health savings. And again, the groups decided on, what a loan, interest rates and how much loan amounts would be, how you'd approve loans, things like that. And they also decided that the health savings would be about 25% of their regular savings. So they were putting, the majority in the regular, but they said, we can put a little bit aside for health. Let's start with that. And so that ended up to be about 15 cents a week per woman, which isn't much, but it does add up pretty well over time. And so from the health savings, I think one of the most important and one of the most popular aspects are the health loans. And so you have this savings that's building up, and the loans are available for when there is a health issue. And so after only 1 year of implementation, there were 2,000 health loans already granted. So it became a very popular product. And the average loan was about $9. So not much. Some women borrowed a lot more, some less, but $9 was an amount that people maybe didn't often have on hand at that moment. And so typically they'd either wait or go to family, friends, neighbors. And in this way, they were able to just, get that kind of equivalent to $9, deal with the health issue. And it worked out, quite well. We also looked at, where are these health loans going? What are people using them for? And we found that 48% of those health loans were going to treat health and illnesses for children. And we also found that 46% of those were being used to treat malaria, and of those, 45% used for children under 5 and pregnant women. So, encouraging kind of messaging and sort of the population where you're hoping to reach. And with the health loan, like I said, it was very popular, and we heard from the women that they felt more at peace. It felt like a safety net, and that really, I think, speaks to the resilience too of, okay, if something happens, I got a plan B or, something that I can do. And then at the end of the cycle for health savings, people would get it back. So just similar to regular savings, there's a disbursement at the end, and so people get, what they saved back plus interest. And so they did the same with the health savings, and we were, again, they can do then whatever they want with this. And we found that women either decided to put it back in that bag, so when they started a new cycle, they still had health savings to then draw from. Some actually maybe had some, lingering health issues that they thought, well, I have some cash, I might as well just deal with this now. And others kind of saw it as an insurance of like, well, I'll buy a small animal, and then if I get sick, I'll sell it and I'll use that. So it was interesting to kind of see how people use that disbursement and also the loans. And here, I guess, the photo, you'll see that there's a special health savings bag. We kind of said, oh, well, you can just put it separately in a plastic bag or, whatever, but people really found they wanted the cross on the bag and a nice bag for the health savings. And then I'll explain these colored bags in a moment. So then finally, people have the information and then they have the money to go to the health center. But people still, there was a lot of distrust with local health providers, and people didn't really feel very confident. They felt like they had bad experiences. They would say they were yelled at often, and often I think it was because they were going so late, and so the health provider would say, why didn't you bring your child a week ago? And so it kind of is this negative experience. And so we thought, okay, well, these health providers are working in the community, and these local NGOs with savings groups are working in the community. Let's try to link them and see, here they've got basically for the health providers' benefit, you have an entire platform of women who have access to some savings and have information, and some of them are pretty hard to reach. So it's a great connection for health providers. And then if we can get the women feeling more comfortable, and then the financial services institution or the local NGO partner, they're able to play a more active role with other important players in the community. So you can see here, for example, so in this program, our local partners ended up partnering with 40 different health providers, both public and private. And, and we worked with them along, what does this linkage look like? How do you approach the partner? What are some monitoring tools? How do you assess quality? How can you gauge from the women, is this working? Is it not? And the health providers, we're also able to capture information. So you can see this health provider, there's a logbook. So you're able to see, okay, who's going, what are they going for? How much are they paying? And the health providers, because they also saw the value of this platform, they negotiated, okay, what can we do for this platform? The women said, first and foremost, we want a friendly welcome. And so it's like, okay, well, that's a good start. That sounds pretty doable. And then we are also able to negotiate discounts on a number of services, because again, they're saying, well, if you're driving demand to my clinic, sure, I can reduce this consult price by a little bit, and I can do this and that. And so then for the women, they said, okay, well, then we need to show we're from the savings group, because, to get that friendly welcome and the discount. And so each of the women has a card showing they're part of the savings group, and then their family members are written on the back. So the family members are all eligible as well. And it's worked out really nicely. And one partner even, so going back to this slide, you want to monitor, how's that relationship going? Are the women getting the friendly welcomes, or what's going on? And so after distributing a health loan, a woman will go, and after coming back, she'll put a stone, depending on her experience, a stone in the red bag, the green bag, or the yellow bag. And the yellow was a satisfactory experience, the green was a great one, and the red was not so good. And so the NGO facilitator, now and then when they would visit the group, they could look at those stones and say, well, so what happened? How's it going? And then they can go back to that relationship with the health provider and better understand what's going on. So that we thought, and that came from a partner, which, is a great idea. And I think we all, health system strengthening is an important idea as well. And so having that feedback and accountability is important. And so thinking of this platform and going beyond, so you have these savings groups who, have the health information, the linkages, they're saving for health. And first, so part of the Saving for Change methodology is there's a social activity that the groups at the beginning of their cycle decide to do. And so oftentimes maybe it's, keeping the school clean, or doing something for the community. And we found that the health groups decided that they would do, many of the health groups decided that they would do their social activity at the health center. So they would go and, help clean or clear bushes. And so you can see here's a savings group in front of a health center, and they were helping with some weeding and clearing of brush. And it was great in that, the providers were shocked. They're like, this is the greatest thing ever. And then it was also, the groups were able to go to the health center and really feel confident, like, I'm here not in an emergency. Here's this, nurse thanking me. And so, that was something that kind of came out that was interesting and a really positive experience. And then also, there were groups, because this is in Benin, one partner had a number of groups along the Benin-Nigerian border. And, a couple of years ago when Ebola was coming out in Nigeria, had a few cases, a lot of these groups were kind of on alert. And so what they did is the partner worked with them and delivered Ebola education. And then the groups decided on their own, well, with our health savings, we'll put some of it together and we'll buy soap and a bucket, and before and after each meeting, we'll wash our hands. And that came, from them. And what was great is that, so in a number of villages, 87 groups actually decided to pool their health savings and buy soap buckets, etc., for the local primary schools. So I think they bought, 36 hand washing kits and donated them to 12 primary schools. And then a few of the women went there and kind of talked about washing hands and hygiene. And this came completely from them. This was not our input at all, which I thought was really great that kind of, they saw a need and they were able to take action with the tools they had. So that was really great. And then just, I decided to focus on Grameen Foundation's work with the health program in Benin, but just to kind of add to, there's so much you can do with a savings group platform or self-help group platform in India. And so currently we have projects, one in Rajasthan, India, where they're working on nutrition and nutrition-sensitive agriculture and gender using the self-help group platform. Burkina Faso, we have a Building Resilience in Burkina program that again uses the savings group platform and incorporates agriculture loans, nutrition, and gender. And then in West Bengal, a partner in a program where we're working with, similar to Benin, health education, linkages with health providers, and then health savings. So it's interesting, this just started, so it'll be interesting in the Indian context. We talked about what we learned in Benin, and in the self-help groups do their savings a little bit differently, but for their health savings, they said, no, we want the box just like them. So those will be interesting to follow. And I think, all of these are designed with an eye to resilience, sustainability, and scalability, and, so that they can live on in the communities. And so, again, I think it's a great platform that you can do a lot with, and as you can see, if you get it going, they kind of take the energy and continue to innovate on their own. So, thank you.
Thanks very much, Cassie. I was very glad to see that you gave the examples at the end of these other geographic locations. So if we're looking at, very often when we look at resilience, we talk about being able to respond to shocks and stresses. So there's a time element involved in that, a temporal element. And very often for the work that we do at the Wilson Center, so we work on health. We do maternal health, reproductive health, family planning programming. We work on environmental issues, so drought, agriculture, food production issues. And we also work on security, right? Conflict. And we find in those spaces, the idea of resilience is very important. And we have been trying to better understand about how we can think of innovative financing mechanisms across those various sectors to build resilience. So I wonder if you could offer any thoughts or insights on having developed health partnerships, thinking about how you're moving to these kinds of partnerships. You mentioned the work on agricultural loans, nutrition, and gender. How easy is it to make those connections across these different sectors where we talk about integrated development and integrated approaches to developing resilience? It's really hard. So some insights, lessons, failures, what we should not be doing. It seems so critical to me.
Yeah, good. It's a good question, and it is hard. And I think a first step is knowing your context. So what are people thinking and feeling, and then who do you have to work with, and then after kind of mapping who you might have to work with, and then speaking with them, you'll kind of see some people are going to be very into it and engaging, and others less so. And so, I think definitely when you start in on a relationship or a linkage, it's you set, you have some goals and boundaries, and then you monitor it. So some say, oh yeah, we're going to do this and that, and then at the end of the day, it doesn't always work out. But I think it's trying to find, it seems like it should be easy, and that a lot of these actors, be it the NGOs with the savings groups or the health provider, I think their end goals are very, very similar, but people are busy going about their day, and so they don't always connect and talk. And so it's trying to open that up a little bit. And we've created a couple of how-to guides of, well, here are some steps you can take, here are some tools to help with the monitoring. But it is tricky, but at the same time, if those connections and linkages can strengthen, they will hopefully long outlast the program and your work there. And so sometimes it is that nudge just to get people together.
And I think what's interesting for me is very often those of us who work in the development community, we think this is overseas in poor resource settings. But I would say, going back to New Orleans, I saw these mechanisms in place in the Vietnamese community in New Orleans post-Katrina. And I'm thinking, I was just doing this work in Senegal or Burkina, and here it is in New Orleans. So these are lessons that we bring back to us here too. It is really across the spectrum. So thank you. Yeah. That was wonderful. So Sophie, I'd like to come to you now and ask you to start with a secret that we don't know from your bio sketch. I'll hand it over to you.
So I was just listening to my colleagues. I was just reflecting that I'm so lucky to have this job. It's just fantastic. So when I'm not busy having this job, I sail. I'm on my boat with my husband, we sail and we don't talk. And because the work we do is very intense, I need those places where I don't talk, I don't think about it, and I just enjoy the time. So a good piece of reflection from me to you is do intense work and play intensely at the same time to have balance.
That's your personal resilience strategy.
That's my personal resilience strategy, except today I'm not very resilient in the face of allergies, so my apologies. So I'm coming to you with a lovely topic, one that I'm really passionate about, the state of evidence. And I can assure you that every single sentence that both Salome and Cassie have shared with you today are true and are based on evidence. And this is a salute to this community of practitioners, of savings groups practitioners, whether it's CARE, it's Grameen, it's CRS, it's Freedom from Hunger, and it's Oxfam. We have committed ourselves to documenting, measuring, probing, understanding, sharing successes and failures, learning from each other. And it is a really very enjoyable community to work amongst because of the trust we have with each other and because we exchange all the time on the things we do. So I'm hoping to make this not a totally boring presentation on evidence and on how we measure things. So I'm going to take you through three things. First of all, as I just said, this is a sector that thrives on data, and it's very creative. We come up with solutions to monitor the progress of those groups with using technology that I never thought I would see used in Western Africa, for instance. I'll take you through what we know so far and just highlight the findings that Cassie and Salome have shared with us with data. And I will also take you through what we don't know. And what we don't know, for me, is super interesting because these are opportunities and areas where we can think, brainstorm, come together on testing solutions. And I will give you a call to action at the end of my presentation because of those Cassie and Salome have both said throughout their presentation, this is such an elegant, simple, low-cost methodology. It should be used more widely. But I'll save my enthusiasm for my last slide. So collaboratively, we are looking at effectiveness, low cost, sustainability, and failures. And we've put together systems to monitor all of us record our findings and share them with Savix, which is a public open source database that you can find online that tracks the progress of savings groups. I think today there are over 10 million members of savings groups worldwide. The bulk of those members are in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's a really cool platform to visit because you can look at programs, organizations, countries, and learn a lot about the depth and the reach of savings groups worldwide. We use e-recording. There's a few e-recording technologies that we actually put in the hands of the savings group, so they self-report and they self-record, which is very interesting to track. And of course, the big push for digital financial services is also going to help us better understand cash flows and where is the biggest need for cash, where is the biggest need for investment in agriculture. In Central America, we just finished a series of financial diaries where we learned that when the group was closing a cycle, a lot of women were bringing their savings back home and drawing down on them. A behavior we'd never seen in West Africa. So it's questioning our methodologies and the value that the savings groups bring to those women. We also use a lot of research and evidence. Oxfam is committed to Oxfam America, but the wider Confederation of Oxfam is on board as well. But Oxfam America dedicates at least 7% of every program budget to evaluations. And those evaluations have included randomized controlled trials that actually we run collaboratively, CARE, CRS, and Oxfam. We did a massive randomized controlled trial in West Africa to look at the results of the basic methodology, and I'll take you through to those results. We use difference in differences evaluations, which are very robust statistical evaluation that don't involve the randomization at a lower level. Randomization is very costly, so that's why we're looking for alternative solutions. We use mixed methodologies where we have quantitative and qualitative questionnaires, and we use storytelling. All of those different methodologies have their own value, their own probing value, but we consider that mixing them together gives you different access to the information and different layers of information. So I think in 2011, the Gates Foundation funded CARE, CRS, and Oxfam to widely implement the basic savings methodology that those three organizations had developed together. And I should say at that time that Oxfam and Freedom from Hunger were jointly working together on this project. Included in the grants were enough funding to run randomized controlled trial. They're extremely expensive. We could have an entire new session on whether their probing value and the gold standard that they've become is really where they should be, but I will not take away the conversation. And we published those results jointly in a synthesis paper that is available on the SEEP network. There's a whole, SEEP is the depository for all the research we do in savings groups. Everybody has committed to sharing their results on SEEP. Oxfam did a strange study at the time because we combined the randomized controlled trial in 500 villages with an ethnographic study that was undertaken by the Bureau of Anthropology at University of Arizona. So it gave us two different lenses to better understand the changes in behavior, whether it was bringing resilience. Some of the results that we found were that indeed Saving for Change was reaching 82% of women living under $1.25 a day, so that's to give you a little bit of context. That these groups were closing the food insecurity gap during the soudure, which is the hard season in West Africa. But what was interesting, it was not only the households that were participating in Saving for Change, it was the communities where there was a Saving for Change group. So the methodology is pervasive in the sense that you don't really need to belong to a group to feel the effects. It's better if you do, but they permeate through the community. Women increase their savings and their loans. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it actually is a brainer because In Mali, where the randomized control trial took place, the average savings per week is 25 cents a week. And the accumulation, Salome mentioned, $870,000 that was shared by a group. I am pretty sure that these women are not saving $50 a week, but they're more saving around $1 or $2 a week, maybe. So the accumulation of saving, and by the way, this is a universal rule. The sooner you save, the better off you'll be in life, wherever you live, at whatever age you start. Savings is the key. Start saving. And the last one is that women who are participating in a Saving for Change group experienced a higher investment in livestock. They priced it at $120 at the time, which is 2011, 2012. And you can buy either 4 goats, 3 ewes, or 1 cow for $120 in Mali at the time. We also wanted to know who were the women joining, because Saving for Change doesn't select members. So we tried to figure out who they were. The women who joined first were more socially integrated, already had businesses, demonstrated some leadership ability. They were slightly older, and they had faced a recent shock, so they understood the value of finding a risk transfer mechanism. The ones who joined later were socially less integrated, but it usually took on average only 6 months for them to join in. So they were not even waiting for another cycle to start to join. We also found that using Freedom from Hunger Food Security Index, that the households were less insecure in the treatment villages than in the control villages. And the biggest impacts for women were in the low status subunits of big households. That's a bit jargony. So Mali is a Muslim country where households are usually composed of 2 or 3 wives. And usually the third wife, the younger one, has less access to any kind of resources that her husband will afford to the other 2 wives. So it's they benefit the most from belonging to the group. And I remember I was reading some of the early focus groups, and this woman is interviewed, and one of the key questions is, how many children do you have? And I think she's like 22, and she goes, yeah, I have 18 kids. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right at all. So I asked the numerator what happened, and she said, what happens is that there's 3 wives. They have 18 children. Each one of them says she has 18 children. So it's a really interesting dynamic, because I want to dig more into that to understand who benefits most. In some groups in Mali, we saw the 3 women, the 3 wives, in the same group, and in some cases, the 3 wives in 3 different groups. That can also help you understand the dynamics at home. So there's a few topics where we couldn't find real strong evidence. It was marginally significant. In education expenses, in enterprises and investing in income-generating activity, in agriculture and in housing. There's a housing, we saw just a slightly improvement over the number of houses with a hard roof. We saw no change in health expenditure, education expenditure, and income. And we saw no change in the total consumption and non-food consumption. And I'm putting those results out because I strongly believe it's a very strong methodology, but these are still questions we have to explore. We found mixed findings, meaning that in the quantitative part of the findings, we couldn't find the evidence, but we found it in the qualitative ethnographic study we did. On the social capital, which is a point Salome made in her presentation, the social capital is probably one of the most powerful engines we can support for women's economic empowerment. Every week, I put my 25 cents in a box with women I know from my village, but they're not my buddies, they're not my social network just yet. Every week when I come back to the meeting, I have to believe that my 25 cents will still be in the box. Every week you do this, every week you build your confidence, your solidarity, your trust in each other. The reason why those groups still function 8, 9, 10 years after receiving support is because of the social capital. the reason why we can come and layer additional interventions on those groups, may it be health, agriculture, business development, reproductive health services, mobile banking, is because of the social capital. So these women who didn't have a network, I have many networks. I have my family, my friends, my sailing buddies, but they have no network. They have no, they can't fall back on anyone. But with a savings group, they start building that network of solidarity and mutual assistance. So it leads to agency and women's empowerment to some degree. So we layered interventions at Oxfam, and I'll just pinpoint to a few because Salome and Cassie have already done a great job at giving you an idea of what we can do with those groups. So we worked in agriculture and agroforestry in Mali, and that led to an increase in food production and in food security. Women's involvement in agriculture has long been a demand from women in Mali. They wanted to branch into agriculture in a more formalized way. And they also contribute to better managing natural resources, which is a key element of building resilient communities. In Senegal, we used the existing savings groups to layer a program that we call R4, which is an integrated risk management strategy that combines together savings and credit through savings groups. A weather index insurance, which is a very complex program of a risk transfer mechanism, and disaster risk reduction. And when we did this, we saw incredible results in the rehabilitation of drylands, where the rice production that was non-existent tripled, quadrupled, and in some cases led to 2 harvests a year. And in all the cases where we used the rice production, those households and villages no longer needed to buy rice on the market. Sorry. We also increase access to finance using warrantage schemes so that they can come closer. Can I get some water? Sorry. So the warrantage schemes allows them to get a higher price for their harvest. So we keep building resilient communities by different mechanisms, always using Saving for Change groups. In Cambodia, we've noticed that where there's a Saving for Change groups and there's a flood, the villages where there's a Saving for Change group will recover much faster. In Vanuatu and Solomon Islands, my colleagues from the humanitarian department at Oxfam have integrated savings groups as a way to build resilient communities. In Senegal, similar to what Cassie was mentioning, we use savings groups to spread the WASH methodology to fight Ebola. So access to savings is rapidly becoming one of the most important development we can propose. It's been recognized by the UN High-Level Panel on Women's Economic Empowerment. It's in a lot of different financial inclusion proposals. And for me, the beauty of savings groups, whether they're CARE or CRS, or the methodologies are pretty similar, but the beauty is putting savings first and not credit. Start by building asset, build a safety net for yourself, understand basic financial inclusion, financial literacy, and then borrow. I think it's really makes sense. The studies we've undertaken have shown sustainability with we polled recently at Oxfam, we polled groups that are 8, 9, and 10 years old with whom we hadn't worked in at least 5 years. We used mobile phone, a platform called Voto, and we had a 99% response rate that those groups were still working, still meeting, still saving, still borrowing together. No support. So for me, that's few development interventions in the world can show a result like this. We looked at the cost, and on average, it's about 15 to 18 costs per member in West Africa. The costs in Central America and Cambodia are massively different for a host of reasons. But it's usually a lifetime change. Girls, when they get married and move to another village, if there's no savings groups, they will create one. We've designed a methodology for youth, for kids to start saving so they can fund their education, for instance. So it's a one-time cost for a lifetime change. I know it sounds cheeky, but it is true. We have the data to show that. What we don't know, so we don't know really the link, the impact on savings groups on women's economic empowerment. And as women economic empowerment becomes a really new, compelling area of work where we can be multidisciplinary, bring people from financial inclusion, from health, from agriculture, from value chains, from private sector together, I think this is an area that we're going to learn much more about in the coming years. We don't really know the impact on children's education. And we hear that most of the time at an anecdotal level. And when we look at the coping index, the coping strategy index, we do see that the more assets households have, the less likely they are to pull children out of school. But I think it's still a bit too early to really say on a sustained basis. The impact on income is, for me, still a little bit iffy being a technical term I use very often. And one of the questions I also have is, what percentage of their savings are they really putting in saving for change groups or in any box? We still don't know that. So, and I just put those questions up there because these are the big ones for me. I have a ongoing box document with my laundry list, and I think I could publish it probably like 200 pages now. One of the things also Cassie mentioned, which is really interesting, when we train those groups on additional interventions on health, on agriculture, we see the direct link that they have with their savings or their loans because they use those savings and loans for that purpose. The question I have is, when we're no longer there, when we don't give training on health or on agriculture or on business training, will they still spend on health if they need to? Or, what's the relationship between the training and the spending? So I think it talks to sustainability. So as I said earlier, I have a call to action for you here and on the webcast to help us promote this methodology, which is simple, sustainable, low cost, and is loved. Every time I go visit a country where we have a program, I'm facing the same thing. Raise more money to create more groups. I cannot raise enough money fast enough to fulfill the demand. And my friends from CARE, from Grameen, from CRS, from Freedom from Hunger are facing exactly the same predicament. So we need to socialize those methodologies. All of our manuals, all of us are open source. Our data is open source. We're very collaborative. Come play with us. And it's a special call to the private sector, because without the involvement of the private sector, it's going to be hard for us to develop the financial tools that we need. Insurance products, long-term savings accounts, retirement accounts. If you act on the fertility rate of women and they have lower children, who's paying for their retirement? What mechanisms are they going to use to be able to sustain themselves when children are also moving to the cities? So I hope that the evidence has convinced you that we're not crazy people. We're passionate about social justice and social change. And we believe, like an increasing number of us, that to really change the world, we have to invest in women and girls, in their education, in giving them control over productive resources. So with that, come and play with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia. That was wonderful. So apart from this idea of you need to save before you borrow, I was quite intrigued as you started speaking. You say that you're developing this evidence base, and you said you're looking at effectiveness, low cost, sustainability, and failures. Tell us a little bit more about that F word, failures. Share some of the failures with us, and then we'll open it up to you for questions and engagement.
So thank you for this question. In Cambodia, when we started implementing Saving for Change, it was integrating in our agricultural department for programs. And we thought it would be great to immediately, as we creating Saving for Change groups, train them on an intensive intensive rise productivity methodology called SRI. So we did both at the same time. So every week they were saving and they were training and they were saving and they were training, and everything collapsed. And that was an invaluable lesson that we need to take groups through an entire cycle of saving before we can add on additional intervention. Let's make sure they own the methodology, that they own their rules, that they trust the management committee that each group has. So I think that was one failure that was super useful to all of us, definitely. The other one I will share is from my friends from CARE. CARE was looking at groups, and I think it was in East Africa and Tanzania, but I may be wrong on the geography. I know it was East Africa. And they thought that to speed up the investments in businesses, they would give matching grants to the groups. And in the experiment that they ran, those groups quickly lent that matching grant to each other, but never reimbursed it. And probably the issue there was the lack of ownership. This is not my savings. It's a packet of money that's coming from outside. It's an outside source. So I can spend it and I don't really have to reimburse it. And that was an invaluable lesson to all of us to make sure that, again, the methodology was acquired and that we would limit external sources of capital or link them with training interventions and programs, so not just ex nihilo, but really integrating them into the core of the group.
It's really good and refreshing to hear about failures, because people say that to me, we want to know what has not worked, and groups are very reluctant to share their failures. So thank you. That's a valuable and important contribution. So let's open it up. We'd like to hear from you. Any questions that you have, raise your hand. A colleague will come to you with a microphone, and if you can give your name and your affiliation and get to your question, please. So yes, we start with these two here, and then we'll come to the back. Yes. I don't think it's on.
My name is Tomas Arango. I'm working at the Inter-American Foundation. And I was wondering, actually, for Sophie, you mentioned in passing the application of these microfinance schemes, or these savings groups in Central America, and that there's a variety of factors affecting that, which you didn't really go into, so I was hoping you could explain some more about that.
So Central America, we have groups in El Salvador and in Guatemala. And Central America poses a contextual problem to us that is really difficult. The level of violence against women make it really difficult to increase the assets that women have access to, especially cash. And that's a debate that's ongoing right now when we're talking about women's economic empowerment. When we talk about women's economic empowerment, we don't mean to say they need to have access to financial services. Because in some cases, you need to solve a problem like violence before you can really link them to financial services. So in Central America, the factors that are really affecting our work is the violence against women, a extremely machista culture, a lack of infrastructure from the government in decentralized services, and social norms. You were talking earlier about, the constant belief and the reinforcement of roles of women that are very sexo-specific, linked to their contribution to the household. And I think in Guatemala and El Salvador, I think that's, for me, one of the highest places where I've seen those things. So we need to influence a number of factors. But at the same time, the groups we're working with come from a culture of political involvement. They have extremely strong demands on women's rights to land, on women's rights to vote. And their recent history, in the last 40 years, of political involvement is really interesting because most of the community agents that we're working with are former political members that were very active during the several revolutions those two countries went through. So it's a very different makeup, and we learn every time we go there. But the key thing that we've learned also, it takes much longer to create trust and confidence in those communities than in West Africa, where it also relies on traditional schemes like tontine. So but there's I could talk a lot about this, but I'm sure there are other questions.
Thank you. Yes, please.
If this is,
Yeah.
there you go. It does work. Good. Thank you all for such a great and diverse presentations on a single issue. I think getting multiple perspectives about how it's involved in health and finance and also the data is really helpful. And thank you to the Wilson Center for hosting this. My name is Jenny Gamble. I'm with Discovery Learning Alliance. And I have a comment and a question, kind of for all of you, really. My comment is really around an experience that I had visiting Village Savings and Loan programs that had been integrated into a DFID-funded Girls Education Challenge grant, actually with one of your CARE colleagues in Zimbabwe. And what they saw, anecdotally, and I believe in the data, was that not only did the Village Savings and Loans programs and groups support increased food security in the face of persistent climate change, but they also saw increased enrollment and retention for children. And we heard that directly from the headmasters saying, since we've put the savings groups in place, children don't miss the days that school fees are due, and parents they don't disappear, right? So the parents continue to pay, and things just run much smoother. So there is some evidence, I think, coming out of CARE Zimbabwe that could support and maybe link some of that. The question that I have is really for all of you, but particularly for Cassie. As you were talking about the health education component, I'm curious to know around whether or not sexual and reproductive health content was actually included in the health education, and if this increased agency with these groups have led to any observed or statistically significant findings in terms of reduced childbearing, healthier children, improved child mortality rates, like all of those components, or reduced population, smaller family sizes. So just kind of, is there a link, or have you seen something even anecdotal around the savings groups and kind of claiming agency over their own reproductive rights?
Great question, and fitting you should ask in that. So when we started this program, it was more of a general, access to health services, because actually when we started it, we had malaria in mind, and we found that actually knowledge was pretty high, but where the obstacles were the actual paying for and accessing the services. So it was a broader look at health. However, towards the end of the program, we asked the women, what else do you want to learn? What else do you want to know? Family planning was number one, with nutrition number two. And so actually we were just able to cobble together fairly small funding, but we're starting with these groups of family planning programs. So, it's great in that the structure's created. So at this point, another, plug for the platform is now that it's created, you can take different, topics and funnel it through. And so we just finished the landscaping, kind of understanding what some of the barriers are, because Benin in particular has, I think it could even be the lowest contraceptive, rate or utilization in sub-Saharan Africa. It's like 9% or something. And so understanding those barriers, and in terms of it's a good question. What else now that this program has been going on for a while, around health, what else has happened? And this particular program, we were working with savings groups, and this health add-on was sort of a last-minute shoestring budget. Let's try this out. And so we didn't have the funding to do a baseline and end line, and so we're, with this family planning, we're hoping to do a little bit more intensive evaluation work, but that's one of those things that we would really love to better measure, because I think there's a lot to dig into, and it just, Again, what we were able to do here was pretty shoestring, but I think digging into it would be really interesting. So, great question.
May I piggyback?
Yes.
I will offer you my evaluation framework for the similar project in Mali, and we can. We started a similar project in Mali recently, linking up savings groups. The two things that we've already learned: really high level of enthusiasm to be offered access to family planning services, and we're talking very remote rural areas where there's no health post. Where organizations don't come to distribute those products. The second thing we've learned is that from discussions with Mary Stopes International, who's a pioneer in that area of work, that we're trying to find ways to curb the herd mentality. And it happens in a way that's very interesting. The first woman to choose one of the methods will decide actually for everyone behind her. So it might not be the best one for all of them. So we're trying to understand the mechanisms of why am I comfortable with somebody else's choice for my own reproductive health rights. So I'll share the framework with you, and then we can look at that together. It would be very interesting.
It would.
It's fascinating. Oh my God. So I think we had, let's group them. So we take the three here, and then we come to you at the back. So let's take these three questions here, please.
Thanks. Ken Conca, I'm on the faculty at American University. Really great panel. Really appreciate your sharing and just the kind of spirit of openness and so on about it. Just two very quick things. Salome said something really interesting, and I wondered if you wanted to elaborate on it a little. I was really interested in your comment about the desire or the need to reorient loans from productive activities to risk management activities, which wasn't quite your phrasing, but that was the sense of, I thought you were saying. I just wondered if you could elaborate on that a little bit more. What would be some of those kinds of loans, and what would be the barriers to that reorientation? Is it the borrower's attitudes, or are there other kinds of barriers that you encounter? Because it sounds like a really interesting innovation. Second, just to be a little bit provocative, when I think about banks, I think about redlining and discriminatory lending practices. I think about the savings and loan crisis. I think about the junk mortgage crisis, which destroyed savings and assets in the African American community in the United States particularly, and all of that happening in a country that allegedly has a strong financial regulatory scheme. And so as this evolves toward more complicated products, I mean, I started to see phrases like weather derivatives and insurance, microinsurance, which is not the same as micro savings, right? It's a risk transfer mechanism rather than a wealth building mechanism, and arguably transferring risks that ought to be assumed at the collective level and by the state rather than by individual households that are not getting the services that they need and so on. So if I were doing this, I would think that the engagement with those kinds of very powerful institutions, matching them with some of the most powerless people that you're trying to empower, that would keep me awake at night a little bit. And I just wonder how you think about the power dynamics in that, and the role of those players in this space.
That's a great question, because this is one of the criticisms that we see about the whole resilience framing, that very often when we talk about resiliency, that it very often does not deal with power dynamics. That's a great question. Let's take these two, and then we'll try to respond to those. So, yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Emily Janock, and I work with CARE, and I just want to tell a very quick story. I was visiting Salome in Malawi, and we were meeting with a VSL group that was specific to HIV-positive patients, so just the most vulnerable people in that community. And they said, you know, you get to the end and you say, do you have any questions for me? And they said, yeah, we hear there are still poor people in the United States. Do you need us to come teach you guys about this stuff? Because we would be happy to do that in that spirit of openness and engagement that's just always so amazing to see. I have two questions. One is, all of you have talked about women's empowerment. You know, for CARE, almost all of our groups are very predominantly women. I don't think I saw any men in any of the pictures up there. Can you talk a little bit about the work you do to engage men? Because you can't get to women's empowerment by only working with women. The second question is, how about when we think about the group governance and the way the group manages itself? You've got groups that are running 10 years after anybody is intervening with them anymore. What are the factors that keep them resilient as a group and able to adapt to changes as new things come up that weren't there 10 years ago when they first got started?
Great. Thank you. Yes, this gentleman here.
Hello, and thank you for your presentations. My name is Aditya Aswani. I'm an intern at Congressman James Clyburn's office. This is a question specifically for Ms. Romana. You talked a bit about randomized control trials, RCTs, and your skepticism with them being the gold standard. I was just wanting to hear your thoughts on that.
She planted that for you. You took the bait. Okay, and then we'll take your question at the back, and then we'll look at all of them. She knew you were going to follow up.
Thank you. You received my check.
Hi, my name is Diana Cayley. I'm an advisor of food security and monitoring and evaluation and learning at Crown Agents USA here in Washington. And as a measurement person, and I did my doctoral dissertation on food security measurement specifically. So I was curious about, Sophie, you mentioned the Coping Strategies Index in the context of housing. And then you also mentioned, I think you meant the HFIAS or potentially the FIES as your food security indicator. So there's a lot of sort of squishiness around how we sort of pick those. And as it relates more specifically to resiliency measurement, these are tiny little slices of this resiliency framework. And really the research is not very robust in how we understand these sort of comprehensive, complex systems around resiliency measurement. So in the context of an RCT, for example, how we choose to instrument for complex systems, we can derive a lot, even if we run the best statistics in the world, we're really only looking at a tiny slice of the resiliency picture. So just sort of how do we enter into a broader conversation about measurement and how we ought to involve mixed methodologists such as myself in that process of mapping that complexity. Thanks.
Gosh, you guys asked the best questions. This is awesome.
We're going to be here for a while.
I know. So we have, fortunately, we have a reception afterwards, so we can continue. But a few questions. Okay, so how do we reorient loans from productive to risk management? What's the process of that? We're mixing powerful institutions with the powerless. Are you losing sleep at night? How do we bring men into this equation? So 10 years later, what are some of the factors that make these group dynamics subsist? How are they resilient from a governance perspective? RCTs as a gold standard, tell us more. And looking at coping strategies index, measurements of resiliency, level of complexity, how do you map and figure that out and move on from there? So who would like to start? One or any of the above? Academy?
Okay, I'll talk a little bit more on the reorientation so that the VSLAs are able to offer loans for risk management. Coming from a country where we are susceptible to a lot of climatic changes, some of the challenges that our women farmers face agriculture in nature, where sometimes they will have loss of seed due to maybe rains not coming when they are supposed to come, or sometimes the rains are delayed, so the groups would want to maybe get a loan, buy extra seed and replant. Sometimes we just have crop failure, where after maybe 2-3 months, the rains stop and then the crops can't perform, can't germinate, cannot give you what you expect. So the VSLs, the way they are operating now, they are really aligned towards, giving people loans to do businesses rather than meeting these ad hoc, unpredictable events that come in people's lives. So my suggestions would be maybe to reorient the VSLA so that they are more flexible in their loan agreement. Instead of maybe paying back like every 3 months the way the VSLAs are operating now, maybe we could give longer repayment period, and maybe even reducing interest, where, members have had, very challenging circumstances. So yeah, there are so many things that could be done into the methodology, the process itself for obtaining loans for the VSLs that could be done to kind of like reorient the way loans are being given now. On the banks, I can start and my colleagues will come in. It's really a challenge for poor people to work with banks because, you know, the conditions are not favorable for them. But I would share an experience in Malawi where we partnered with Opportunity Bank of Malawi. For us really to break through, it wasn't easy, but I think the success factor was in really coming up with a memorandum of understanding and encouraging the bank to develop products that were tailor-made for the village savings and loan associations. Otherwise, most of the VSLA members feel that banks, you know, they charge a lot of interest, they grab things away from you in case of default. So they are not very popular, but if they are special products created for them, we see a lot of interest in the VSLAs to utilize the banking services for their own good. On engaging men, the experience in Pathways program that I'm managing is that men don't really want to come and sit in a classroom and learn the way women do. So we are coming from a background where VSLAs are very popular with women, and you know, it's the women who want to go and sit under a training for nutrition or agriculture or whatever. The men, it's really a challenge. But we managed to come to deal with that challenge by looking at what men like. So in my country, football is very popular. So we are using football as one of the forums to bring out men. And they come in large numbers. They will come after a match, maybe for playing like 30 minutes, you push in whatever kind of message that you want to do. So that's one forum that has worked. And there are other forums like using dramas or dances, they work, but the most popular for Malawi has been the football match. It's the best for them. And yeah, they get to listen as they watch the football.
You tire them out and then they listen. All right. Cassie?
Yeah, thanks. And I can, I guess, in terms of the power dynamic part, we have done some work with linking savings groups to financial services institutions, and I personally have been less involved on that work. And I think, you know, it is watching out for, you know, advocating for the savings groups and at least thinking about the linkages with health providers. You know, part of it, I would think, with those financial services institutions or formal institutions, there are benefits for them. So, you know, I think that negotiation piece is probably pretty important because you're saying, you know, I've got this platform of people who can, so there are benefits, and so hopefully that creates some negotiating power so that it's, you know, hopefully fair for those groups as well. But I can speak a little further to the engaging men part, and it is very important, and we found it, at least in West Africa, and I don't know if this is after having women's groups after some time, the men have been saying, well, aren't you going to do this for us? We want groups. Or oftentimes they're kind of standing outside the circle, you know, what's going on? And you know, I think this strategy has been mostly for women. However, I think we're coming across certain, especially areas where you're not really going to get that change unless you include men. And so some of our programs, we've then specifically included them at different aspects. So for example, in Burkina Faso, when talking about nutrition, you can talk to the women about a balanced meal and what children should eat. And, you know, if you were to have a kitchen garden, this is what you could grow. But, you know, they're not probably the head of the household. And so if the household needs to decide, that information needs to extend to the other members, which is often, you know, their husbands. And so we've created these gender dialogues where, you know, the men and women, the women and their husbands go through with a facilitator. So we train that NGO facilitator. And there are a number kind of starting off more generally and then getting into some of the topics. So really practicing the talking to one another, making decisions, and then integrating that to some extent in the education. So the final session of the nutrition module, for example, the women invite their husbands, and they're, the last session is kind of a review of all the other sessions. And, the last step is sitting down and, okay, well, what is our plan for the lean season? We have these different tools to work from. What are we going to do together? And with the family planning, we kind of suspected this, but in the formative research, it's confirmed that, one of the bigger barriers is men's perception on women who use family planning and what that means. And so I think we'd be remiss not to include them in those conversations. So we're figuring out, what parts maybe of the education do we integrate, or do we do these gender dialogues? Because, I don't know if we necessarily want to advocate, for the women to sneak and find methods. No, let's figure out, okay, well, it's all about being able to make informed choices. And so, here are the options, and it's for ideally for them to figure out together. So I think for success there, again, we'll have to include men, and trickier, and I think still a lot to learn, but important.
So on engaging men in Senegal, actually they came to us and asked to create savings groups for them. And we did, and it's unbelievable because the level of resources and assets they have access to make those groups on steroid. And it introduces a new level of inequality that we've just started that a year ago, so we're still trying to understand the dynamics there. They're far less patient than women. They want to reap benefits faster, so you probably see a higher asset turnover in those groups than in women's groups. So it's a work in progress for us, and it's a way to learn about those the dynamics. The RCT, the randomized control trial, had demonstrated that women tend to gain a higher voice in the community first, and then it bounces back into the household. So it's not a concentric circle of empowerment of women's voice. It starts outside the home, and they bring it back home, which is interesting also in the way we need to involve men, not just at the authorization level, but really in a more dynamic way. On linking with banks and insurance and big bad wolves, it's very interesting what's happening. There is a real appetite from insurance companies to come and get involved in the sector. In Ethiopia, where we pioneered the weather index insurance 5 years ago, we now have a competitive bidding process to find the insurer at the local level. We also have competitive bidding process at the international level, at the reinsurance level. But I could not agree more with you that farmers who subsist on $1.90 a day should not carry the insurance and reinsurance risk. It's too high a price to pay. In Ethiopia, the government has done extraordinary work with us to integrate R4, the program I mentioned about managing risk, into their social safety net program. So we have a clear understanding that the Ethiopian government really wants to address the risk that 8 million farmers are faced with, and these are the most vulnerable ones. What we need to work on is making sure that the pack of international donors who are supporting the Ethiopian government and the safety net are participating and helping finance this effort to shift it from us, World Food Programme and Oxfam, it's a joint initiative from us, to the government. So, but I see encouraging signs of understanding that the insurance companies have to come and work with us and support part of the investment of creating those products. The big question for insurance, among the biggest one, I think Salome actually touched upon it. Are you better off saving more or buying an insurance premium? Are you better off increasing your own social safety net in the form of savings, or relying on an insurance product that has a probability of being available that's variable according to the years? We're using 3 different methodologies to confirm an under par amount of rain. We use satellite data. We use green indexes where we look at how green things are to gauge how much water they've received. We use village gauge. We use participatory assessment with the communities. But these are complicated programs and products. And insurance also probably needs some level of regulation. You would not wear your seatbelt every time you get in your car in the US if there was not a law mandating that you do. What mechanisms, what mandatory mechanisms can we use not to weigh on the farmers? The farmers understand their risk, but to weigh at the meso level and at the macro level. These are ongoing questions. I'm a reform banker. I used to work in private equity. I sleep much better at night working with women in the developing world than with my former clients, whom I adore, but it was different. So I think we need to engage with government, private sector. I think we have an intermediation role to play. I'll tell you a story. That's another failure. A few years ago, Oxfam is a big confederation of Oxfams. We have colleagues in the Netherlands. Our colleagues in the Netherlands made an investment in a microfinance institution that provided loans to women members of Saving for Change groups. In one instance, this woman had a hardship. I think her husband died, and she fell behind on paying back her loan. So the microfinance institution sent the gendarme to arrest her in the public space. And when I was not at Oxfam, but for me, that made me think that our intermediation role is that instead of calling the police, call us and see how we can mitigate this risk. And that's the intermediation role we can have with banks. It's making sure that the banks design products that are within the reimbursement capacity of women, that we don't promote over-indebtedness, that the financial products that we create respond to a need for the client, not of ROI for the bank. And I think they're more and more susceptible to this dialogue with us. We still have a long way to go, but in Salvador, we were able to do work very similar to what Salome did, and we worked with a financial cooperative that created the products that we needed. So it will take partnerships that link private sector, public instances, NGOs, and grassroots organizations to solve those issues. They're eminently complex. On the RCTs, I know we're running short on time. The RCTs are extremely costly, and they still remain to some degree black boxy. The attribution of results from the RCT to distinctive activities undertaken by the project is still problematic. So they can give you very good results. You know, the results I showed you are solid, but we still don't understand the how. So we need to be careful using RCT. They were very well used in microfinance. But the other issue that they pose, in the RCT we run, we had control groups that did not receive the intervention and treatment groups that received the intervention. They were rolled into Saving for Change groups. In the zones, in the control zones, we had a take-up rate, in some instances, of 26%. 26% means that a quarter of the population self-enrolls in a group because the demand is so high. One of the principles of randomization is that your control sample does not get contaminated. I hate this term because contamination is so good. In the case of social development, that's exactly what we want. So then my expert colleagues, and I'm not an evaluator, but my expert colleagues are like, oh, your sample is contaminated. We can't use it anymore. I'm like, this is great. I love it. How can we contaminate it more? So this is, for me, that's one of the biggest issues. It works in medical experiments. It's much harder in social experiments. So we have to respond to your question about evaluations and using adequate methodologies. We have to find the methodology that are adequate and that don't necessarily fulfill the donor's request to get the right number. We need to understand how things work and they don't work. We have a compliance and governance responsibility towards our donor and our funder, but I also think that we owe it to ourselves, and especially to the women we work with, to find the right way to measure the social progress, or going backwards But we need to be, I think we need to be very clear about that. I will stop here because I think we're out of time.
Wow, what a really rich discussion. So I think we started talking about resilience and this concept. We talked about the need to be anticipatory, absorptive, adaptive, and transformative. And we took that into the microfinance sector and thinking about what it means to build an asset base for innovation when we're looking at what's predictable and unpredictable. We were all reminded to save before we borrow. But also seeing the different ways that the approach to making these connections were made through social funds, savings, loans, group membership, health education, health financing, partnerships with public and private partners, and then thinking about how we document the evidence and how do we take note of the changes that were happening. So modifications to the VSLA programs to increase resilience, thinking about how discounts are being offered in traditional packages, how there was a more friendly welcome to engage participants, and how that moved from an individual household level to communities, how it was permeating across the initial points of interventions, and how it even led to additional requests for more services like family planning, and what were the elements that were tied to self-selectivity for those who were already participating in those groups. So trying to understand the mechanisms and the complications and the complexity involved in all of those dynamics. So that was really fascinating, but having a sense of what we know, but also what we don't know. What we don't know in terms of women's economic empowerment, children's education, income, and the percentage of savings that's being allocated to these groups. Where are we struggling in terms of questions around measurement and measurement tools? And ultimately, how do we deal with questions around power dynamics and what it means in terms of thinking of the products that these banks or financial institutions will offer that really help build resilience among the most vulnerable? That was amazing. You guys did. Please join me in giving a hand. I really want to thank Care. It's just wonderful to collaborate with you. I think this is a really important and significant conversation we've had today. It was webcast live. We will have a video archive of the discussion, and we at the Wilson Center will produce a written summary of the discussion where you will also have the PowerPoint presentation. So you will come back to it, please. And that'll be on our blog platform, New Security Beat. So now we have some time for further informal exchange and discussion. We have some hors d'oeuvres just outside the door. So please stay and continue the conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was so much fun. What a treat.
It all together. So, yeah, no, I feel like I learned a lot.